What's going on, guys? Welcome back. Hope you are doing well. In our last video, we registered sort of a dummy account. In this video, we're going to be continuing on with our authentication setup, and we're going to start off with detecting whether or not a user is logged in. And the reason we want to do this is because if a user is logged in, we want to take them over to the inbox view, and if they're not, we want to take them to the login view. So this is sort of what that's going to look like. We're going to be looking at some sort of user session property, and we're going to use that to store the user session or whether or not they've logged in. And if they have, the content view is going to present us with the inbox view. If they have not, we're going to present them with the login view and say, hey, you have to either log in or create an account. So the first thing we're going to do is go inside of our auth service and create this user session property. So it's going to be a published variable, and it's going to be a FIR auth or Firebase auth dot user. And this is what we're going to use to keep track of whether or not the user has logged in. And when we initialize our auth service, we are going to say self.user_session equals auth.current user. So this is functionality that we get from Firebase. When a user has logged in, it's going to store this for us locally in the application. So right now, because we signed up a user, we should have someone logged in to like an account with the test3@gmail that we just created. But obviously in our application here, we don't have any logic to detect whether or not they are logged in, and if they are, to show them the inbox view. So let's go ahead and just add a print statement here to see if we have a logged in user. So user session ID is, and let's go ahead and just say user session.uid. And let's go ahead and run our application and see what that gives us back. So I'm just going to pull up my console here, and guys, just go ahead and hit the login button, and you guys should see that we do have a user session right there. So it's 5FIUX, whatever that is. And if I go over to my authentication console, that's what we see there as well. So this is the user that I registered in the previous video. This is his UID, and we are seeing that reflected in our code as well. So this means that we have a user currently logged in. So now what we want to do is, if we go back to our diagram, we want to introduce this sort of routing logic or presentation logic, right? So we have a user session, so we want to go down this path. We want to say, hey, let's go to the inbox view. So we need to go over how to do that, right? So it's a little bit tricky because we need to communicate with this auth service somehow from our content view. So what we're going to do is go and create a content view model here in our root folder. So I'm going to let's create two new folders here, view and view model. I'm going to put my content view inside of the view folder, and then we are going to create a content view model here. So basically, this content view model is going to be listening to the auth service and checking on that user session property. And if it's there, we're going to show the inbox view. If it's not, we're going to show the login view. So let's go ahead and say class content view model, which is going to conform to observable object. And we are going to have a published var here for our user session, just like we did in our auth service. And we actually need to import Firebase up at the top. FI or auth or Firebase auth.user. Cool. And we're going to write an initialization function, and we're going to write another func. It's going to be a private func called setup subscribers. So we're going to be using Combine to do this, guys. But we're going to do that in just a second. What I want us to do now is go ahead and actually implement this presentation logic that we see here. So right now, if we go to our content view, it's just text hello world, right? So the first thing I want us to do is implement our view model that we just created. Content view model. And then we are going to go into this body, and we're going to create a group. And this group is going to contain either the login view and the inbox view, and it's going to have some logic in here to route to the correct view. So we're basically just going to say if view model dot user session is not equal to nil, we're going to show the inbox view, else we're going to show the login view. It's pretty simple. once you break it down, right? So basically, we're looking at this user session property that's a part of this content view model. If it's not equal to nil, that means we have someone logged in, and we are going to take that user to the inbox view. And then later on, we'll fetch all of their information, their messages, their user data, all that stuff. If it is if it is nil, then we're going to just take them to the login view because we know that means no one is logged in, and that's going to force the user to either sign in or create an account. Before we run this to test this out, guys, let's actually go up to our app file, and we need to replace this login view as our initial view with our content view. And then the content view will be in charge of routing our user to the correct view based on whether or not they are logged in. So if you were to run this now, it should still just take us to the login view. So that means our presentation or routing from the content view is working on some level, right? Even though we have a user logged in, we are starting off with the content view, but it's taking us over to the login view. So that's a good start. We just need to go back to the content view model and figure out how to populate this user session. So if you guys remember, this user session is inside of our auth service, right? So that's where we're populating it right here. So basically what we need to do is listen for updates on this user session property from our content view model, right? So we're going to use Combine to do that, guys. So let's go up and go back to your content view model and say import Combine. And in this setup subscribers function, we are going to subscribe to updates on that user session property that's inside of the auth service, and then populate our user session property here inside of the content view model. And ultimately, this guy here is responsible for what is going to, or how the routing is going to work inside of our content view. So we're starting in the auth service. We are listening for updates there. We're going to populate this property based on that, what the value is in the auth service, and then go and do the correct routing to the correct view in our content view. So if you guys have never used Combine before, it's a little bit confusing, but let's go ahead and type this out. So we're going to say auth service dot user session dot sync. So you're going to hit enter on that block, and you're going to say weak self user session in, and you're just going to say self dot user session equals user session. And then we're going to say dot store in, and we need to create some sort of cancelable collection. So we're going to say private var cancellables equals set any cancelable, just like that. And just go ahead and store that in there. So basically, guys, this is just how you listen for updates using Combine. So this user session property on the auth service is a published property. So when it changes value, we are going to receive that value here like this, with this sort of completion block. And then we're going to set our user session from the user session we get in the auth service. So like, to make this a little bit more clear, you could say user session from auth service. Right, so this is what's coming from the auth service. This is our user session, and we are populating that property here. So now in our initialization function, go ahead and say set up subscribers. And now if you guys were to run this again, it should route us to the inbox view. So that is looking absolutely beautiful, right, guys? So we have successfully completed this sort of diagram here, right? We have some user session. The content view is listening to it, right? You could imagine the content view model in here as well. And based on whether or not this has a value, we will either show the inbox view or show the login view. So next up, there's a couple more things I want to accomplish in this video. It's going to be a little longer. I want us to go over how to sign our user out and then how to log our user in. So let's go ahead and get started with that, guys. So now that we are keeping our user logged in and we're routing them to the correct view, we want to go over how to sign out, right? We got to be able to sign our user back out to ultimately get us back to the login view so that our user can sign in. And then our authentication flow will essentially be complete. So we want to be able to click this login button here and have it sign our user out and take them over to the login page. So what we need to do is go back to our auth service, guys, and we're going to add another function in here to sign a user out. So as you guys can see, this class is responsible for all of the authentication functionality, right? Our login, our sign out, and our user creation. So this is really good encapsulation or modular code, right? We're making sure that certain classes are only responsible for certain things, and we're not mixing and matching too many things, right? So this makes your code a lot more maintainable, a lot more scalable, and a lot less bug prone, and it makes it easier to solve bugs when they do happen. So this is just a pro tip for how the pros do things. So anyway, we're going to say do try auth.auth.signout. And then we also need to say self.user_session equals nil. And then we're going to add a catch block and say print debug failed to sign out with error dot localized description. I've never had a sign out error, but it is good to just make sure you're always handling errors when they could potentially happen. So really quickly, guys, I want to talk about what's going on here. This line of code on line 36, this signs us out on backend. And this guy updates routing logic, right? So there's a difference between these two things, and it's really important to understand this. So basically, if we only did this, right, if we only do the auth.auth.signout, which is going to sign us out on the back end, and we never set this user session property back to nil, it won't automatically route the user back to the login page. Because if you guys remember, this user session guy here is what's in charge of showing the user the correct view, right? If we go to our content view, it's all based off of this user session. And on the flip side, if you only set this user session to nil, but you don't actually sign your user out on the back end, you will show the user the login page, but they won't actually be signed out on the back end. So you have to make sure both the back end and the client side or the phone are both in sync, right? So it's very important to make sure you guys do both of those things. And you could comment out one or the other and go through the process and see what happens. But anyway, let's go back and see where we're going to actually execute this logout functionality. So basically, guys, we need to go to our profile view, and here's our logout button. We can just say auth service.signout. And let's go ahead and run our code and see what happens. And I don't know if this is going to work, and this is going to be a really good, yep, so that actually didn't work, right? And it's a tricky concept to understand why. Even though we're calling this sign out function, it's not actually signing our user out right away. But if we were to run the code again, I think it would correctly sign us out, okay? So we're going to come back to this. I really just want to go over how to log our user in, and then we'll go over why that didn't work right away. So back in our auth service, guys, we are going to fill in this login function so that we can ultimately log our user in here. So let's see, we are going to say do catch, and let's just go ahead and copy and paste this error here. And we could say fail to sign in user with error. And in the do block, we're going to say let result equal try await auth.auth, dot sign in with email and password, and make sure you use the async throws. And we're just going to pass along the email and password there. And then what we need to do is once we sign the user in like that, we need to populate this user session property. So the way this is going to work, guys, is we get this result back from our API call here, and we need to use that result to populate this user session. Once we populate that user session, it will send the update to our content view model, which will ultimately update our content view. A lot of moving parts here, and I'm going to show you guys a diagram pretty soon here to break it all down. But we just need to say self.user_session equals result.user. And here we need to do the same thing in our create user function. Right, so essentially we want to make sure that that auth service guy gets populated, or sorry, the user session gets populated when we log in and when we create a user, right? Because when we hit that sign up button, we ultimately want to populate the user session and send the user over to the inbox view. So let's go ahead and run this code and see what happens. So I'm going to say test3@gmail.com and log in. And you guys will notice that nothing happens. So this is tied into the problem we saw when we were trying to sign out. But if you were to run the application again, you will notice that I am signed in as someone. So the reason for this is pretty tricky, and we're going to go ahead and do a breakdown of this now. I'm going to implement the solution in the code and then give you guys a visual breakdown of this to tie it all together. So basically what we need to do is implement a shared instance of our auth service here, guys. We need to say static let shared equals auth service. And basically the issue is happening because we have a bunch of separate instances of this auth service. So we're creating multiple instances of this class. So there are multiple versions of our user session out there. And we need to sort of unify all of them through this single auth service so that the content view and the login view and all that stuff are using the same property. So if that doesn't make sense, it will once I show you guys the diagram. But essentially now what we need to do is go to our content view model, and instead of initializing the auth service like that every time we need to use it, we need to just route everything through this single shared instance. So go back to your login view, replace this with .shared, and do the same thing in your registration view. And we also need to do that in the profile view. You guys see here we're creating yet another instance. So now everything is being routed through the same instance of the auth service, whereas before we had a bunch of separate instances. We had multiple auth services throughout the application. Now there's only one. So everything that is using that auth service can now access the same user session. So let's go ahead and run our code again and just run through this entire authentication flow to make sure it's working. So go here, you hit log out, and you guys notice it signs out right away. We can now see if we can log back in. Log in, and you guys notice it logs me in right away. And if I were to kill the app and relaunch it, you guys notice I'm still logged in. And then if I go here and log out, kill the app, relaunch it, I'm still logged out. So everything is solved through that shared instance guy right there. And we also have another error here, guys. We need to publish changes from, we're publishing changes from a background thread. We'll take care of that in the next video. I want us to make sure that we understand what is happening here. So I'm just gonna pull this diagram up here really quickly and break this down for you guys. So I know this looks a little intimidating, but it's gonna make sense once we start going through it. So this is the previous configuration we had where things weren't working as expected, right? Where each one of these things, the registration view model, content view model, and login view model, we're creating separate instances of these auth services, right? That's why we have auth service 1, auth service 2, auth service 3. You can see that this registration view model is initializing auth service 3, this guy auth service 2, this guy auth service 1. And each one of those auth services, every time it gets initialized, right, it has, let me go here, it has this user session property, right? So we got rid of this problem by introducing the shared instance, which we'll go over in a second. I just want to talk about why this wasn't working. So basically our login view model, when we hit that login button, right, it was updating the user session on auth service 1. But our content view model that's initializing auth service 2 needs this user session to be updated in order to route our user to the correct view. But this login guy was only updating this guy. Nothing was happening to this guy right here. And the registration view model would have done the same thing, right? The only thing that matters is the user session that is on the content view, and that will ultimately route the user to the correct view, like this we see down here. So we fixed this by introducing a shared instance, right? So basically, now this shared instance allows us to create one instance of the auth service, and now there's only one user session. And each one of these guys, the login view model, content view model, and registration view model, are all listening to the same exact user session, right? So if we go back to the code, this is what this looks like. We have our shared instance here, right? Auth service.shared. So now we're only looking at this user session guy that's created through that shared instance. Then if we go to the content view model, this is where we access that guy right here through that shared instance. So you can imagine that that's the single instance we've created, and our login view model uses the same one. Our registration view model uses the same one. So the reason it wasn't working, guys, was because we had our previous configuration set up like this, where we had a bunch of separate auth services created in the app. What we did to fix that was create a single auth service, and all of these things are updating and listening to the same user session so that we can ultimately accomplish what we need to accomplish. And you guys can see here, I took some notes. The auth service contains the user session property, the login view model, and registration view model. Update this user session property when the auth state changes. So we log in, we create a user, we populate this guy with a value. Since we utilize a shared instance of the auth service, both view models update the same user session property via the shared auth service, and our content view model is listening for the updates on that guy, right? So that's why this is a dotted line and these are direct arrows, right? These are directly updating this user session, and our content view model is listening for those changes. Our content view is tied into our content view model, and it will ultimately route the user to the correct view once it receives the notification from this single user session property. That's a full breakdown of how all that works, guys. And honestly, this is what really separates my channel from the rest of the YouTube content out there. I'm breaking down high-level, complicated concepts for you guys that's going to turn you into better software engineers and actually help you get those senior level positions and build complex mobile applications. This isn't gimmicky stuff here, right? We're not just teaching you how to do some crazy cool animation or anything. This is real software engineering. And if you guys want to continue on this journey with me, make sure you check out my website at stephancodes.com. I have a bunch of amazing courses here. If you sign up and become a member, you get access to all of this stuff for free. So just go to the Become a Member section. The link is in the description. Highly recommend the Diamond plan. It gives you access to everything on my site for just $40 a month. That means you get all of the access to all of these source code templates, Uber, crypto app, chat app, Instagram, Twitter, Pokedex, all this amazing stuff. And I have so much more awesome content on the way. Then we also have these pro courses, guys, that introduce a bunch of these really high level techniques in a much more in-depth, right? There's only so much I'm going to give you on YouTube for free. So getting access to these pro courses will really help take your development skills to the next level. So highly recommend signing up there, guys. The link is in the description to this video. But anyway, that's going to wrap it up for this one. We now have our authentication flow fully set up and ready to go. So now we can actually start signing up a couple different accounts and getting started with sending messages, guys. So get excited for that. We'll see you in the next video. Peace out.